If Ben Charrington talks, you should probably listen. And we've talked about this, Scott, more than enough times on the show that yes, Charrington does speak in word salads, but there are little things that he says that if he says it, it's more than likely coming to fruition. And he had said at the end of the season, when he, has his press conference and stuff, he says that they will be looking for making trades. A lot of times people want to see people go out into the free agent market. And he even mentioned then that trades may be the better option for them. And what does he do during the winter meetings? He goes out and makes a trade. So that's where it's like, yes, there's this word salad and all this kind of stuff, but this trading for players and trading from a surplus is nothing new. It's something Ben Charrington had mentioned previously. So it should be no surprise that they made the trade. But Scott, it was a little bit surprising who they traded for, and that's not in a bad way. It's because it's a name that's not really familiar to a lot of Pirates fans. And like I said, myself, I know who he was, but it wouldn't be like the first name that would come off the top of my head as a trade target.
Yeah, I didn't really know who he was until the name popped up. I don't get to check out a ton of Blue Jays games, so the big names that they have, and he's somebody that maybe was a little blocked in Toronto, so he got traded to the Guardians at one point during the day, and then the Pirates swoop in and snatch up Spencer Horwitz, first baseman, lefty bat. But giving up a little bit, maybe surprisingly, some names that you and I have discussed, before the podcast started. Luis Ortiz being the big name there, somebody who stepped up when the Pirates needed him to this year. But like Ben has been saying for quite a long time, you have to, when you have a position of strength, you have to deal from that strength. And I know later on things got a little questionable about exactly how far they're going to deal from the strength of the starting pitching that they have right now. But I think we'll dig into this. What were your initial thoughts when you saw him coming over?
It was kind of it was weird to me because I was asleep when this happened. So it's like one of those things that you kind of just wake up first thing in the morning. And of course, I have like Twitter alerts for, when pirates are mentioned, like just different things. I follow like different pirates, like feeds and stuff. And it was like I had a ton of notifications, and it was like, Pirates trade Luis Ortiz. And I was like, okay. I mean, this is something that's kind of been talked about that if there was, a pitcher that would have been traded, somebody that could have been the odd man out, it would have been Ortiz. A lot of people, within the industry, as well as fans, as well as it's been mentioned in the media, that, Bubba Chandler, they are looking to come up at some point in time during next season. A lot of people want him in the beginning, much like we had Jones, would possibly push Ortiz, out of that rotation spot. So he would be probably the most expendable arm. Not that any arm is really, truly expendable, because you don't know, you can't plan for injuries, underperformances, different things like that. But I wasn't surprised to see his name when I scrolled down a little bit further and saw, Michael Kennedy thrown into that. Josh Hartle's not a name that, really surprised me too much. Just drafted last year out of Wake Forest, has under 2 innings in the majors, took a step back in his last season at Wake Forest, regressed a little bit there. A guy who was very intriguing, not a power left-handed arm, more of like a command and control type of guy. He's a guy that could accelerate throughout this, like up the system, if he performed well. But coming off a season where he only pitched 74 innings plus those 2 innings, would probably have some innings limits. Going my full prospect nerd here a little bit here, because I do know a decent amount about him. But Michael Kennedy's a guy that I've talked to, Eric Garfield down there in the FCL a lot. Eric Birdland, people may know him as on X and everywhere else, does a lot of that stuff. I liked a lot of the stuff I saw from Kennedy as a very polished high school arm, another lefty, performed well in Bradenton, talked to, Thomas Zinzarella about him and ended up the year in Greensboro. But the more I thought about those two guys, I kind of pushed those off to the side just because they're a couple years off. I mean, the Pirates need help now. So that's where like my mind kind of went to. And you traded a younger arm who, had a not so great first full season, performed well last year, and everyone has kind of been talking about to a degree that is a possible, regression candidate. And then you trade him for a guy who, worked his way up through the Blue Jays minor league system, a younger guy, doesn't have that full year under it, but in the time that he was in Toronto, performed pretty well. Obviously, he's a guy that, people are going to bring up performs better against, the right-handed pitchers than the left-handed pitchers. That has been, consistent throughout the minors. But for me, I mean, this would kind of be on the level of, you know, trading a Quinn Priester for a Nick York. Two guys as far as like kind of being in the same level of their development within their respective systems. Two guys who were kind of, I mean, Ortiz for the longest time wasn't even listed as a top prospect into he kind of like flew his way through up the system and blew our doors off in his first few innings. Towards the end of, I guess it would have been 2022. So, I mean, it's the same kind of thing, with Horwitz. So, to me, it's a fairly, and I don't want to say like even trade, but in my mind, it's two teams, trading for need, and it's an actual baseball trade.
Absolutely. You have, that was something that Cleveland identified as a need there, surprisingly enough, for their pitching. And so they found a guy that's got some upside that maybe they can get some more consistency out of him. Maybe he can add a pitch. We can see more of what we saw flashes of with him. And the Pirates pick up a young, controllable bat. We've talked many times about these kind of deals, these kind of risks that the Pirates need to take and they need to hit on. We're seeing a guy that both that Ben Charrington and Steve Sanders are familiar with, that Matt Haig, the new hitting coach, is familiar with, kind of worked his way up through the system with him. So maybe he was instrumental in identifying the type of hitter that he is. It seems to be, pretty good as a defensive first baseman. I know that Toronto tried to work him at second with varying degrees of success there. To be a little diplomatic about that. Well, when I heard this, like I said, I wasn't that familiar with him, so I went to MLB Film Room and I watched as many clips as I could before I could not handle one more 15-second DQ ad, because even for like a 35-second clip of him hitting a home run, there was a 15-second DQ. And I love Derek Green as much as the next guy, but it just got to be too much. But he seems to have good extension, uh, being able to get some power and pulling pitches that are on the outer third of the plate. So even if some of those don't quite have enough juice to get over the fence, looking at his numbers for 2024, 1.2 B WAR in 328 at bats, 87 hits, 12 home runs, a 265 batting average, 40 RBIs, no stolen bases. So he's not a speedster on the base paths, but we've got other guys that can do that. A 125 OPS plus. So it's small sample sizes. And speaking of small sample sizes against lefties, only 72 at bats. Going into last season, O'Neal Cruz, we would have said we identified some issues with him against left-handed pitching that seemed to, knock on wood, get straightened out a little bit as time progressed. So I guess my thought when I look at these numbers is he going to be a platoon candidate? Is he somebody who's going to get the opportunity to just go for it as the full time first baseman? Are we going to see other guys get moved around? I'm not quite sure what their plan is. If maybe they take a flyer on a right-handed bat to maybe just a non-roster invitee just to see what happens. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's to me, like, I know that, Charrington and Shelton have said, I mean, even recently, it kind of seemed, and it came out, I think even, Rosenthal had talked about it, that, that they were talking about, with Brian Reynolds, it would be like playing like a part-time first base. So this would be a good, I guess, litmus test to see if, Reynolds can handle the position. I mean, I know I had probably said a couple of times it's like almost like rip the band-aid off and just throw Reynolds over there at first base, but then also kind of cautioning that I mean, I think Brian could handle the position, but what if it looks really bad? What if it doesn't work? So then you have Reynolds at first base, you go out and you get two outfielders, and then you have nobody else in the system that can really handle the position. I mean, I know you have Jared Triolo, IKF, other guys that have played the position,
Hmm.
but you don't have anybody who's an actual first baseman at the position. I mean, Horwitz is a first baseman. He was a first baseman in college. And like you said, he was moved a little bit to second base, but then you also look to see, who the Toronto Blue Jays have standing at first base. We talk about, guys forcing themselves onto the roster or the bat will play, or at least I do, where it's like, okay, this guy's a first baseman, but we want to get him up to the majors because we think he can perform. The bat's going to play well enough. Let's see where we can get him. And this is like kind of the stuff I hope for, with some of, the Pirates players. We even talk about, somebody pushing, with Tamar Johnson, possibly at some point in time, pushing Nick Gonzalez and maybe pushing Nick Gonzalez to right field or Tamar goes to whatever it may be. I mean, those are the decisions that, quote unquote, good organizations. I know that Toronto didn't have the season they were hoping to have this year, but have been, in the mix a lot over the past, few years. So those are the types of moves you kind of want to, make. So, and with Horwitz, I mean, if this guy was sitting in our double A and triple A for the past 2 years, and this is one thing that stuck out to me, he had a 149 WRC plus, a 954 OPS, a 16.4% walk rate to a 15.2% K rate. The one thing this guy does is hit. This guy is a hitter. I think that at some point in time, power can maybe come naturally. Obviously, in his major leagues, he did play a little bit the season before. It wasn't, that last year was his first experience. He got like a cup of coffee previously, only has 13 home runs and 425, major league plate appearances. So if he gets, a few more, you may see up to 15 home runs. So he's not that, prototypical power that you're getting from first base. But at this point in time, I want guys that can hit. I want guys that can get on base. I mean,
I want guys that don't strike out.
yeah, and I want guys that, if you're going to put the ball in play, you're going to, if you put the ball like good things can't happen. If you don't put the ball in play, you know what's going to happen. You're going to be sitting back down. So, yeah, he's the type of guy that, I mean, and the one thing you mentioned, I mean, it's getting way too deep in the weeds with the conversation, but like, kind of clogs up the base pass possibly because it doesn't seem like he has a whole lot of speed. He would be if he had a little bit of speed, maybe your prototypical leadoff hitter with, the way that he gets on base. I mean,
Hmm.
people are saying that, among, qualified rookies, I mean, he's sitting there in the top five of on base percentage. So he's a guy that, came up to the majors and performed very well. There just happened to be a decent amount of, you know, fun and exciting young players, Paul Skeens being among one of them on our side, but there was a lot of good rookie hitters as well that kind of gets lost, and it's not a player that we get to watch a lot. I mean, he plays in the American League and he plays in Toronto. So it's not like there's, too many Blue Jays games that are probably on TVs around the Pittsburgh area, getting to see this guy play. And that's something I kind of mentioned to you beforehand, was just that, you see Luis Ortiz going out. You see Luis, fight back from, having a rough rookie season to having a good, second season in the majors, was asked to, start out in the bullpen, even, high leverage situations, and then works his way back into the rotation, actually performs better, numbers wise, a lot of the numbers in the rotation. And you're thinking, okay, we've kind of finally figured something out. Well, that's the other thing with me is, okay, then maybe we can figure it out with some of our other pitchers. We obviously haven't been able to do it with the hitters. Toronto has a pretty good reputation of developing hitters and then having to go out and get pitchers. So, I mean, I know he didn't come directly from there, came through Cleveland. But to me, I mean, it wasn't the 3-team trade that we're, used to, where, we get Andy Rodriguez because San Diego sends, what was it, Joey Lucchesi or whatever it was, or to the Mets, and that completes it. But I mean, Toronto, Horwitz was playing a lot of second base. They trade for a second baseman. That was a position of need for them. Get Horwitz back, immediately comes to the Pirates, and they get some young arms, which Cleveland is, really good at developing. So it was kind of like, a major league trade, and across the board, I'm pretty happy with it. And I mean, talking about, and I don't want to get like, I'm not getting immediately negative about a player that has left, but there are some certain things that were, kind of on Ortiz's stat line that didn't, give me like the best feels about, him being able to repeat what he did last year. Last year, he had a 3.32 ERA, a 1.113 whip, very, very good, 132 innings pitched, 15 games started, seemed to be moving in the right direction. Hitters had a 243 batting average on balls in play against him, which was basically saying that, the major league average sits right around like 300. That naturally that's going to come up a little bit. People that like Fangraphs and they like the FIP was sitting at 425. So almost a full, point higher than his ERA. So that's showing some regression. His expected ERA was right around the same at a 4.28 ERA. People would be looking at, B WAR versus F WAR. And I know, Scott, you're not totally bought into WAR. And I can understand why, when you put out those numbers you did about, Dave Parker in one of our previous episodes, that the guy's hitting the cover off the ball and is, barely above a replacement level player. But I mean, the other stuff here is the chase rate. You go onto StatCast. You want to see a lot of the red numbers. Luis has a lot of the blue numbers. He was in the 9th percentile in chase rate, 13th in whiff, 20th in K, 26th in barrels, which is pretty much saying that, he's not getting the chases, he's not getting the whiffs, he's not getting the Ks that you would expect from a big frame, supposed a little bit of a power pitcher. And guys, when they are hitting the ball against him, they are barreling it up. So I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I mean, it's a possibility that's like, okay, sell high, I think you mentioned before the show, possibly. I'm thinking along the same lines. Or that, even if he does regress even a little bit, he's still a major league arm. It's not saying that. But maybe as Pirates fans, I talk about us, romanticizing certain players and stuff.
Yeah.
and different things like that. Ortiz did have a very solid season. Like you said, 3B war. I mean, basically, you have Spencer Horwitz at 1.2 B war in, you know, three-fourths of a season. You get him a little bit further up on that, and you get a first baseman who has over 2B war if he performs the same. When's the last time we saw a first baseman on our team consistently performing over 2B war? I mean, and especially if you're looking to make those little incremental improvements to work your way towards a playoff spot. I mean, we had a guy in Rowdy Tellez who was way below, that zero point 0.0, that replacement level B war for the majority of the season. If we get a few more wins in there or whatever it may be, what can the season turn out to be? So, I mean, I'm not going to say, okay, Spencer Horwitz, stamp it, is our first baseman for the next, 4 or 5 years or whatever it may be. But like you said, Scott, I mean, taking this risk that this is a guy who has made it to the majors, he's performed. You're trading from a position of strength. You traded a starting pitcher when you and everybody else around the majors, fans and media, believe you have a couple guys in Chandler and Harrington waiting in the wings. I mean, I think it's a very smart move to make. And it's at this point in time, it's almost like a necessary type trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there was a little bit of blowback on Pirate social media, and how much of that is just the frustration of being a Pirates fan that's bleeding over. So many people have been saying, "Please, just make a move. Let's make a move," and then they make a move, and oh well, not that move. But like you said, of the starting pitchers that are under consideration, you would think for the rotation at some point next year, he was the least objectionable to move. He seemed to be the odd man out. I do agree with this, because you don't obviously Skeens is untouchable. I feel that Jared Jones is pretty much untouchable. Mitch Keller, I think I would have to be moved uh, by something big to take that leap, and of course that's a conversation for I'm sure just a little bit. But then the guys like Chandler and Harrington and Ashcraft, these are all guys that you haven't started the clock on these guys yet, too, because control is always something that a team in the market size of the Pirates have to be concerned about. So you have a guy that's shown time in the major leagues, has had some success. The Pirates see him as a regression candidate. Cleveland feels like they can unlock something there or maintain something. And we talked last week about, do we overvalue the players that we see every day or every 5 days? Are we getting attached to these players where there are improvements to be made? There, you need to deal from areas of strength without dealing too far into those. And you're getting a guy that, according to MLB trade rumors, has 6 years of control. He's going to be a Super 2 player, most likely. But that, if it hits, if you get the same kind of return, the same kind of results that maybe from you get from a Joey Bart, do you have part of that? We've complained a bunch of times about how first base always seems to be a piece of the puzzle that's missing. Is it possible that we have our first baseman going forward, or at least a partial solution to that big hole that's always at first base?
Yeah, and the other thing that I definitely want to mention before we move on from this trade is that, I mean, I'm hearing out there that he's 27 years old. Well, number one, he just turned 27 years old. It wasn't like he was 27 years old, during this whole past season, is kind of about to turn 28, and saying that he was old at every level that he was at. Well, he was old at the first level he was at because he was drafted in 2019, had about, I don't know, I think it looked at it was like 100 plate appearances between like rookie and low A. And then the pandemic hits. There's no minor league season. So when he comes back, he's a couple years older. He starts out in high A, moves up to double A in that first season. The next year, he's in double A and moves up to triple A. And the next year, he's in triple A and he moves up to the majors. So he debuts in the majors at 25 years old. And yes, that was like his cup of coffee. The pandemic doesn't hit. And I know you can't go back in time and change that. But if you just bump all of those back, he's debuting, in 2022 at 24 years old, not 25 years old. So it wasn't like that he, kind of creaked his way and he was like this perennial, minor leaguer. No, he basically worked the system that it was like, okay, start at a level, bump up halfway through, start at that next level, bump up halfway through, start at that level, bump up to the majors, and kind of worked his way up. And like I said, he succeeded, and I gave out his numbers already earlier, in the higher levels over the last couple of years. And for me, like I said, the biggest thing to me was the walk to the K rate while hitting well. So I mean, a lot of people will say, well, look at his batting average on balls in play. It was a little bit higher when he was in the minors. I feel like a lot of guys that are in the minors, their batting average on balls in play, if they're a good hitter, is higher because I hate to say it, guys, in the minors, the fielding is good. You get down to the lower minors, the fields aren't as good if you're not playing at one of the, the major league, facilities or a newly renovated facility. So, like, to me, like, I look more towards what's your walk rate, what's your K rate, what's your on base percentage, and what's your overall OPS? Are you still hitting for power? Different types of things like that. And he kind of checked all of those boxes, across the board. And he spent time at each level, kind of before he moved up. So he progressed how, most people progress to the major leagues. We get wrapped up in the Juan Sotos of the world, the Bryce Harpers, the Fernando Tatises, that are making it up here at, 19, 20 years old. And all of a sudden, it's like when a guy gets up here and he played his first, professional season, or at least part of that, at 26 years old, and he's about to start his second season at 27, that he's like washed and he's like an old man. No, these are like when these guys hit their strides, like
Mhm.
26, 27 through like usually 31, 32. And there's guys that can defy age. But that's usually the meat of when, the majority of Major League Baseball players, not these outliers and these, phenoms, generational talents, show their ways. But these baseball players, that's what we're seeing from Brian Reynolds. I mean, Spencer Horwitz, in my mind, is kind of like in the same vein. I'm not going to say he's the same player. Brian Reynolds had a 6-WAR season. I don't know if Spencer Horwitz will ever have a 6-WAR season, but he's kind of in that vein of that college level player that works his way up the system. Brian Reynolds gets a shot a little bit earlier because Eric Gonzalez doesn't know how to play the field and runs into Starling Marte, and you have to bring him up early in the season. But it kind of seemed like the plan was he was going to be that cup of coffee guy at the end, and you'd be looking at the same type of thing. So, I mean, that's the other part that just kind of frustrates me is just like we got this old prospect, or even like a Billy Cook. We got this old prospect. I mean, these guys for baseball ages are still really young, especially when we see people about to shell out a ton of money probably at some point in time to get 33, 34-year-old Christian Walker. Do you know what I mean? So like who didn't hit his stride until 27, 28, 29. So
Not
that's just
not
a
ev- yeah, not every prospect has to be fast tracked, and sometimes when they get fast tracked, you end up with a Henry Davis who runs into those problems, those first real walls at the major league level. And what does that do for development? Does that stunt him to an irreparable level? And so there's nothing wrong with taking time to make sure you're properly developing. And something else to mention about Horwitz is from the videos that I watched, a lot of pull power, straightaway center power, but is he going to be somebody? He is tailor made, it seems, for PNC Park. So some of those doubles, they were long doubles that I saw him hit against Atlanta that hit off the wall would likely be home runs. A lot of arc to them, deep off the wall. Those might be home runs at PNC Park. And I know we talk, and I've mentioned before about they only play half their games at PNC Park, but the number of at bats he can get with that short porch and getting a little bit of pull, especially if he does, as you mentioned, develop into a little more power. At 27, he can still have some room to grow, and we're seeing that with some guys that like Triolo starting to develop some more power. It seems. So those guys can build, especially once you get to the major league level. Just because he only had 12 home runs last year doesn't mean that he can't. You were saying maybe 15, but we might see a little bit more of a jump just based on where he's getting his at bats.
Yeah, and the one thing, I mean, I know if you want to go, deep in the metrics is a thing called launch angle sweet spot, which is basically showing that it's a ball that is hit at the right angle, the right sweet spot to create, the most potential for an extra base hit and more than likely a home run. And he is sitting in the 81st percentile in Major League Baseball last year in that. So what you're kind of saying just from even watching videos. So that's actually proving a little bit of a point there that guess what? The eye test works and metrics can also work. The metrics just may prove, kind of what the eyes are watching. But we talked to you, you kind of like put out earlier there, Scott, that, there was some stuff that came out after the Ortiz trade was made about some comments that were made before the Ortiz trade was made. And I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this just because I don't know how much it's going to affect the Pirates offseason moving forward. Um, Noah House and Andrew Destin from the Post Gazette, put out an article on Wednesday. I did also see an interview with Alex Stumpf, I believe from the guys over at North Shore 9, questioning about, Keller and Jones. Said that he had, heard some stuff about Keller. I believe that was definitely going to happen. It's something that a lot of people have mentioned or kind of put there in the wind just because of the amount of control he has. And yes, in Pirates terms, $15 million is a lot of money, bumping up to $20 million at some point in time here. I mean, that's unheard of, kind of in Pirates fans' minds and stuff. So, I mean, the obvious discussion would be, would he be a trade candidate at some point in time? So I wasn't surprised his name was mentioned. But then, Alex Stumpf said he hadn't heard anything about Jones, but, Destin and Noah House, they hear that Jones is very available from league sources. To me, I listen to other stuff as well. Robert Murray, over at Fansided, he has a podcast that he puts out a couple times a week, and just basically said he heard that they were listening on those two players. It wasn't, I don't think, as deep into these conversations as maybe it was, I don't know, voiced to Noah and Andrew. But for me, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that within Pittsburgh media and Pittsburgh social media, the next thing that happens is a horrible game of telephone where it goes from, these guys are available, or even if the Pirates are listening to the fact that these guys are already gone, the Pirates are looking to trade them. I mean, obviously, there was another quote in that article from league sources, not from the Pirates, that they would do this to trim payroll or to, get another major league bat, something they did with Luis Ortiz. I mean, to me, this is a lot of poor Pirates. They always trade away their good players. and especially the ones that cost a lot of money, especially in, Keller's, you know, case. With Jones, I mean, I've seen his name floated on other teams' blogs and throughout, social media throughout this because he's a young and exciting player and because he was mentioned in a possible trade with the Orioles from last season that I don't know if it ever was as far in talks or if it was something that, was just mentioned in passing. That's the thing about these is that nobody really knows like how far into these conversations the thing go. And by very available to me, Scott, I kind of took it as Pirates are having conversations with multiple teams. They have targets. They're looking at somebody. They're maybe dangling Luis Ortiz is the most obvious thing. The guys are shrugging him off and they're saying, what if it was Jared Jones? What would the offer be? And they
Yeah.
do these backs and forth. I mean, we've all watched Moneyball, and there's pieces of it that aren't very realistic. But the conversations between GMs and the conversations that Billy Bean has, where he's calling multiple guys, trying to do these types of things, to me, that's extremely realistic. And especially when you get them all in the same hotel,
Yeah,
late at
that's
night, having a couple drinks, having dinner together, whatever it may be, I feel like a lot of these conversations happen, and I'm not saying that they, weren't listening on these guys, but I don't believe it went to the other side of the pendulum where they were actively shopping or trying to trade these guys.
Yeah, I think that that's an important piece in this is exactly the circumstances of it being at the winter meetings. The whole place is full of league sources. You've got people of differing levels from all the teams in the same spot at the same time. And, as someone who makes their living through negotiations, like, you talk about things that maybe you throw something out there that you don't have any intention of coming through on. Like you said, hey, you know, um, I want this player. What do you got to have for this player? Oh, Jared Jones. Oh, well, Jared Jones. I don't know. Maybe Luis Ortiz. Listening. It's Ben Charrington's job to listen and listen on every player. The Paul Skeens, I think, has to be the only player, just based on his level of multi generational talent, that he has to be untouchable at least for the next few years. Anybody else, even MLB Network last night. If anybody watched the coverage of MLB Network, Dero brought up, Jared Jones. They had a little, they had like a contest with the interns. Where the interns were doing proposed trades, and they were evaluating the proposed trades that the interns did. And he kind of, blew up the one intern for bringing up Jared Jones to the Guardians. And he's like, but I would consider this Jared Jones for the Martian straight up. And so everybody was like, oh, well, okay, maybe. So that's the kind of level that Jared Jones is seen at across Major League Baseball. So for the Pirates, who have him in their hands, to think less of him, I just don't buy it. I don't live in that journalism world, so I don't know exactly the process of that and what you do for your sourcing and all that. But I will say that it can be when it's vague like this, when it's possibilities, when it's listening, when it's potentially available. I think that there's a broader burden of proof there. There are things that are never going to be proven, can never be proven, can never be disproven. So it makes for interesting topics of conversation. Probably gets some views, gets some clicks, gets talked about. And really, in today's media landscape, that's what they're all looking for. That's what we're all looking for: more eyes, more ears, more attention, people to talk about us. And you know what? These guys hit a home run with this one. Their names were on the tips of everybody's tongue yesterday.
Yeah, and the other piece of this is that I mean I have to mention that Noah did have the opportunity to speak with Ben Sherrington later and ask him about further trades, and Ben Sherrington like just basically said, well, in theory, it's something that could be a possibility, but you don't want to like overextend your hand to the point where a strength then becomes a weakness. I mean, because this at this point in time, I mean, I'm just thinking as a guy, obviously sitting in my basement, not officially covering the team, not a GM for the team, not in any way affiliated with the team. And I would be thinking, man, if we trade Jared Jones or Mitch Keller, we're gonna have to sign another pitcher. That would be my like immediate reaction because yes, Bubba Chandler could be immediately ready. And I believe that Thomas Harrington, I spoke with you about this beforehand. I believe he is as major league ready as he is going to get. But are you going to go into the season with Paul Skeens and then, Bubba Chandler, Thomas Harrington, one of Mitch Keller and Jared Jones, and then Bailey Falter? Number one on, two guys that are rookies, one guy that, is didn't finish his rookie season due to injury. And Jones, he got stumbled a little bit and then came back and kind of slowed down a little bit. So you number one from an inning standpoint, the only person that would not have limits, and I think that he probably would still have some limits on his innings there, would be Paul Skeens. If you would trade Keller. If you don't trade Keller and you trade Jones, and you have Skeens and Jones, but then you have Bubba Chandler, who you're working up with innings, Thomas Harrington, who you'd be working up with innings, Bailey Falter, who was injured last year, who would need to be worked up with innings. So, I mean, to me, I think that at that point in time, it could potentially become, not the as much of a strength as it had been. And then you would be trading a player to then have to, if you don't get another major league ready, pitcher back in that trade, which if you're trading a major league ready pitcher, chances are, I don't know, you're getting a major league ready pitcher back because the team would probably be looking for a need, the other team. So you'd probably more than likely be looking for a bat. That to me would create more issues than we would need. And I will say that like in the article, they said that both of these things were reported to them before the Ortiz trade. So this could obviously, have changed the thinking. But like I said, it created a firestorm on X. The fan obviously ran with it and has blown it to the nth proportion that both these guys are being traded away. And, you know, the Pirates are cheapskates and they're trying to cut costs with Keller because he's already costing too much.
Yeah.
Even though their payroll as of today only sits at estimated, and that's with everything put in there. Ethan Holohan sits just below $73 million. So unless you're going to try to go out there and sign like Santander or something, I mean, Keller's extra money, I don't know what that would even actually do.
Yeah. As the podcast representative on Blue Sky now, so go follow me on Blue Sky, same pirate takes. Um, it was also a topic of conversation over there as I spent my first day on that platform. And I know that this isn't really the place you get your hot takes because we were both, trying to be very reasonable. Something about the idea of bringing some people brought up Keller being traded as almost an outrage. But I didn't feel that. I would actually be open to trading Mitch Keller if it was a significant upgrade for an outfielder. There's reports that and I don't know how it would match up, but the Cubs are looking to move Seiya Suzuki. Is that's the kind of upgrade it would take for me to be okay with moving somebody like Mitch Keller because we have a need in the outfield. He was third in OPS among qualified outfielders with a 848 OPS and 21 home runs. To put that in perspective, Brian Reynolds was tied for 11th. And, we all love Brian Reynolds, and he is our constant. He is our rock. But to move Keller to take that kind of hit in almost a solidification of the cost cutting and where they're finally paying a guy so they can't have him around. I think that to move somebody like Keller, you really would have to take a big step forward. So that's the kind of deal that I would entertain. It's not just, oh, we finally have somebody that's good, so we have to get rid of them. I think that there's a path, an unlikely one, where he could get moved, and I think it would work out. But yeah, like you said with Ben's comments, which I think was a little out of character for the way he acts as a general manager to to react to that kind of report and kind of tip his hand a little bit more than he usually does to say in his own GM speak kind of way of it's something that's not out of the realm of possibility, but moving more arms might be a detriment to the organization.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of for me, it's yeah, it would take a lot. I think that I mean I've said it more than once. Like I feel like that Ben Charrington should be listening. Like it's his
Hmm.
job. I mean, may be a time where somebody may do one of these things that becomes quote unquote an overpay. A lot of those things aren't known until the people actually get on the field and perform and different things like that. But I mean, it would kind of take something like that. I mean, we've seen trades happen with major league arms already this offseason. We've seen Brady Singer get traded from the Royals. Brady Singer had the best year of his career. Obviously, doesn't have as much control as Mitch Keller does, and they got back a utility infielder in Jonathan India and a unproven Joey Weimer. I mean, so if that wouldn't do it for me, I mean, obviously, but and then the other one is Garrett Crochet, which is for a huge prospect package, because obviously the White Sox are in a different position. They are in rebuild mode, or at least hopefully quick retool to rebuild, or quicker rebuild type of thing for them. But yeah, I mean, and that's the tough part about all of this is matching up needs. It's matching up where you are as far as competitiveness or years from competition, and then also matching up, you know, taking on money versus giving away money, different type of stuff like that. Because I know that the Cubs are trying to move Bellinger to save money to add in other areas. If they don't move Bellinger, would those types of things happen? And that's where, like I said at the beginning of the show, Scott, was just that you know if you lined it up and you told me, okay, the Pirates are going to trade for a first baseman or trade for a player to play first base, I don't know how long it would have taken me to get to Spencer Horwitz, but it obviously would have taken me a little bit of time.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. A name just popped into my head that could play into this equation because we haven't seen him play. Trey Cabbage. I mean, I've completely over the last few days forgot that he's on the roster for the Pirates. Is that a piece of the puzzle too? I think that it's just these wheeling and dealings and um, ideas and names being thrown out there. I mean, I'm sure that when we talk about building a bullpen, Dowry Moretta coming back can slip a lot of people's minds. So if you don't have all the names in front of you, it can be difficult. At least we know that there are people who are well compensated at high levels that have all the information in front of them with a big whiteboard with all the names that are working on solving this puzzle.
Yeah, I can only look at roster resource so much in like one day.